Good evening, dear friend. I'm glad you've joined me tonight. Perhaps you're settling into bed, the hum of a quiet fan nearby, or maybe a soft lamp glows at your bedside. Wherever you are, you're welcome here. Before we begin, let me offer a gentle invitation. If these stories bring you comfort, consider pressing like or subscribing, so you'll always have a place to return when sleep feels far away. And, if you'd like, share in the comments where you are listening from tonight. It helps us feel connected across the miles. Now, dim the lights, let the day slip away, and picture the hush of evening. Imagine the window slightly open, a cool breeze moving the curtains, or perhaps the steady warmth of a fire nearby. We're about to step back in time, not with haste or clamor, but with the unhurried pace of memory itself. Let's begin our journey with a quiet wish, a hope so small it might almost be overlooked, yet strong enough to guide an entire life. A hidden wish rests quietly before the long road begins. There are moments in history that do not announce themselves with banners or bugles, but with the simplest of stirrings in the human heart. Picture, if you will, a young man standing by a window before dawn, the world outside still resting in a blue-gray hush. He carries no sword, no shining armor, only a folded letter in his breast pocket, a letter he has written but never sent. It is not a declaration of bravery, nor a bold proclamation of destiny. Instead, it is something smaller, more fragile, a note of hope scribbled in uneven hand, that one day he will return. He does not read it aloud. He doesn't need to. The words rest inside him like a lantern unlit, promising a glow when the time is right. That is the hidden wish, quiet, unpretentious, yet powerful enough to draw him forward when the days grow long and the nights heavy. In the early hours, as the first streaks of light push gently against the horizon, the house around him sleeps on. He tightens the laces of boots still stiff with newness, the leather creaking faintly in the silence. Every sound is magnified, the scrape of wood, the whisper of cloth, the thump of a heartbeat that he tries not to hear. He is not a soldier yet, not really. He is a farm boy, a shop hand, a student, someone's son. Yet in his heart lies that folded promise, a desire to see the end of something he cannot yet imagine. Think of how the world smells at that hour. Dew clinging to grass, a trace of smoke from the embers of last night's fire, the faint iron tang of tools leaned against the porch. Ordinary scents, yet he inhales them deeply, knowing they will be missed. The human mind does this instinctively when standing on the edge of departure. It stores away details, like small treasures to be unwrapped later in darker seasons. And then comes the thought that startles him. Not fear of battle, nor fear of leaving, but fear of being forgotten. What if the quiet life he has known moves on without him? What if the friends at the general store speak of him less and less until his name becomes just another memory? That fear, unspoken and heavy, becomes another kind of hope, that he will live to return, to take his place once more among the familiar. The road ahead is unknown. He has heard stories told in the dim corners of taverns, tales embroidered by older voices, of smoke so thick it blinds, of cannons whose roar splits the sky, of comrades who vanish in the fog of war. Yet tonight, he holds close the softer picture, the image of his mother's hand smoothing the coverlet, the sound of his father's boots on the porch, the gentle tilt of the family dog's head as if to ask, "Are you really going?" These quiet images weigh more than drums and flags. They are what he longs to preserve. As he steps outside, the world greets him not with a flourish, but with the simple chorus of morning birds. The sky carries no judgment, only the soft indifference of clouds moving east. He walks to the fence line, running his hand along the worn wood. His palm knows every groove, every splinter. It is not farewell, not entirely, but a way of saying, I will remember you. And in that simple gesture lies the quiet shock of history, that wars, battles, and turning points often begin not in glory, but in solitude. One person standing still, holding on to a wish too delicate to be voiced, yet strong enough to lead him into a storm. Ordinary steps carry the weight of farewell and promise. The morning comes not as a thunderclap, but as a slow unfurling of light across wooden floorboards. A rooster calls from somewhere beyond the barn, but even he sounds reluctant, as though aware of the weight this day carries. Inside the modest home, the stove ticks faintly with last night's warmth. The young man rises, careful not to stir the others too soon. He sits for a long time on the edge of the bed, boots in hand, staring at them as though they hold the future. They are new, the leather still stiff, soles unscuffed. In their shine, he sees reflected the blurred outline of his face, pale in the weak dawn light. A simple pair of boots, yet they are also an emblem, for they will carry him away from the known fields, the orchard, the worn paths of childhood, into landscapes he cannot imagine. In the kitchen, the table waits with yesterday's bread wrapped in cloth. His mother has left it out, knowing he would rise before her. He breaks a piece, the crust rough in his mouth, but the taste anchors him. Flour ground from fields he sowed, baked in an oven that has known his family's laughter for years. It is, in every sense, bread of home. The house sighs around him, the slow settling of wood, the faint rattle of a loose shutter, the whisper of fabric as someone turns in bed. He knows he must leave soon, yet he lingers, caught in the tug between duty and comfort. His hand drifts to the folded letter in his breast pocket again. He does not take it out. The words within are for him alone, a charm against loneliness. At last, footsteps sound on the stair. His father appears, hair uncombed, eyes shadowed with a night too short. He says nothing at first, only places a hand on his son's shoulder, heavy and reassuring. The silence is the language of men who have shared fields, tools, burdens. Words might falter, but the pressure of that hand speaks clearly. I know what you are facing, though I cannot walk it for you. His mother comes next, apron tied hastily, cheeks flushed from the stove's rekindled fire. She has packed more bread, a small wedge of cheese, and a bundle of dried apples. She fusses at his collar, straightening it, though she knows the uniform he will wear later will make her adjustments moot. Still, the act comforts her, and he lets her do it, bowing his head like a boy once more. At the doorway, his younger sister clings to him, refusing to let go. Her eyes are wide, brimming, though she tries to smile. He kneels, whispering a promise that he will return with stories, with gifts, perhaps even with songs. She nods, though neither believes it fully. Promises at a doorstep are like dew. They shine in the moment, but they cannot endure the sun. Outside, neighbors gather quietly along the lane. Word spreads quickly in small towns. Departures are rare enough to draw a crowd. Some stand with arms folded, others with hands clasped, hats held respectfully. No one cheers. They simply watch, the air heavy with understanding. Each departure carries the possibility of never seeing that face again. The wagon waits at the crossroads. Other young men are already seated, their own families clustered around them. The driver, an older man with weathered hands, avoids eye contact. He has made too many such journeys, watched too many hopeful faces turn away from home. The walk to the wagon is not long, but it stretches like a mile. Each step feels etched in memory, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the creak of leather straps, the faint scent of lilac drifting from a neighbor's yard. He drinks it all in, knowing these details will return to him later when the nights are long and the sky is foreign. A small shock comes when a boyhood friend steps forward, pressing something into his palm. It is a smooth stone, worn flat by the river they used to play beside. "For luck," the friend mutters, embarrassed by his own sentiment. The young man tucks it into his pocket with care. Later, in trenches or on marches, that stone will find its way into his hand again and again, grounding him more than any medal or banner could. The wagon jolts forward. Families wave, some walking alongside for a stretch before turning back. His mother's figure blurs in the distance, apron fluttering in the breeze, until she is swallowed by dust. He keeps his eyes fixed forward, for looking back would tear something inside him. The road itself is ordinary, lined with fields, bordered by split-rail fences. But to him, it is transformed. It is no longer just a country lane. It is the dividing line between what has been and what is to come. Birds rise from the hedges, startled by the wheels, their wings flashing white in the sun. He watches them until they vanish, wishing for a fraction of their freedom. The others in the wagon are silent at first. Each man turns inward, lost in thoughts of his own parting. Then someone hums a tune, low and steady. The melody is familiar, a hymn sung in churches and parlors. One by one, voices join, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the air vibrates with a song that carries them forward. It is not triumph, not bravado, but something gentler, a shared recognition of courage and fear alike. By midday, the town lies far behind, replaced by stretches of open countryside. The sun beats down, and the road grows dusty. Still, the wagon moves on, each turn of the wheel pulling them deeper into a new reality. The young man shifts on the bench, feeling the letter in his pocket, the stone in his palm. Small tokens, but together they form a shield of sorts, a reminder that he is more than just a name on a roster. He does not yet know the sound of gunfire, the smell of powder, the exhaustion of endless marches. But he does know the weight of goodbye, and that alone has changed him. There is a solemnity in ordinary steps, a power in the moment when foot leaves familiar ground. For wars do not begin with battles. They begin with doorsteps, with mothers adjusting collars, with fathers pressing silent hands onto shoulders, with neighbors standing in hushed respect along a country lane. They begin with bread wrapped in cloth, stones pressed into palms, promises whispered into braids of hair. That is the true shock, how something so monumental can be born of gestures so small. Daily chores whisper how duty first takes shape. The wagon has carried him away from the lane of his childhood, yet the rhythm of life insists on asserting itself. It is an old truth. No matter how great the journey or how uncertain the road, a man's first duties are often the simplest. Before he can grapple with questions of courage or survival, he must learn again how to rise with the dawn, to move with the quiet discipline of routine. The camp where the young men are brought is little more than a clearing at first. Rows of canvas tents hastily stretched, smoke rising from cook fires, the hum of many voices murmuring at once. The air smells of damp cloth, boiled coffee, and wood newly cut. There is a sense of waiting, of something about to begin, yet not yet named. At sunrise, the sergeant's whistle cuts across the clearing, sharp but not cruel. The sound summons the men from their tents, pulling them from sleep into the raw air. The boy from the lane blinks against the pale light, pulling on his boots with fumbling fingers. His stomach protests, not from hunger, but from the uneasy shift between home and here. He steps outside, joining the others in a line that wavers like a row of saplings in the wind. The first chores are almost laughably ordinary: carrying water from the creek in dented buckets, stacking firewood, though awkward hands often drop the logs, scrubbing pots that have already blackened from soot. These are not heroic tasks, nor even particularly difficult. Yet there is something quietly profound in the way they set the pattern of soldiering: obedience to small duties, endurance of discomfort, attention to the rhythm of a group rather than the whim of an individual. He remembers carrying water at home, the feel of the yoke across his shoulders, the chatter of birds overhead. Now, the same act carries a different weight. Each trip to the creek is not only for his thirst, but for the thirst of dozens of others. The buckets seem heavier, the handle biting deeper into his palms, because the work is no longer for himself alone. The soft shock comes in the realization that war does not immediately roar with cannon and smoke. It begins with soapsuds, with aching arms from hauling wood, with the scratch of unfamiliar straw mattresses. At night, when he lies down, it is not the thought of battle that keeps him awake, but the question of whether he will ever grow used to the smell of so many bodies packed close, the chorus of coughs and snores that fill the canvas dark. There are small mercies amid the chores. The man beside him, older by a decade, shows him how to angle the bucket so it does not slosh as much. Another teaches him the trick of folding his blanket tightly so it stays drier in damp weather. A third passes him a tin cup of coffee, the bitter taste shocking but warming all the same. These acts of instruction and kindness become the first threads of connection. Sometimes the sergeant watches in silence, letting the men fumble, learning through error. Other times his bark startles, reminding them that the small tasks are not to be dismissed. "If you cannot keep a pot clean," he says one morning, "how will you keep your musket clean? And if your musket is not clean, what then will keep you alive?" The lesson lands. The young man finds himself scouring pots with more attention than he ever thought possible, as though each blackened surface holds a reflection of his own fate. The camp begins to take on the appearance of order. Tents aligned straighter, paths worn by repeated footsteps, fires burning with more efficiency. The chaos of arrival settles into a rhythm, as predictable as the rising sun. He begins to mark time not by clocks, but by the sound of bugles, the smell of meals cooking, the changing light across the clearing. There are moments when he almost forgets the larger purpose. Bent over a wash basin, scrubbing shirts in cold water, he could almost be back at home. But then a passing officer, with his polished boots and clipped stride, reminds him that this is not home. It is the threshold to something else entirely. The men grumble, as men always do. Complaints about the food. Always the food. Gripes about the straw that pokes through their bedding, the blisters that form from ill-fitting shoes. Yet even as they complain, they do the work. And in that, another quiet truth emerges. Duty is not always about grand gestures. It is about doing what must be done again and again until the doing itself becomes part of who you are. One evening, as the sun dips low, he finds himself stirring a pot of beans over the fire. The smoke stings his eyes, and his arms ache from the day's labor. Yet there is a strange peace in the scene. Around him, men laugh softly, sharing stories of their towns and families. Someone hums a tune, low and familiar. The pot bubbles, the fire crackles, and for a moment, the world seems held together by nothing more than chores well done. He thinks of the doorstep he left, the bread and cloth, the stone in his pocket. He realizes that if he can endure these daily tasks, he might endure the greater ones to come. The stone feels warm in his hand, though it has no warmth of its own. It is his hope, carried quietly, even here. The night settles, the camp sinking into stillness. Somewhere an owl calls, its voice long and mournful. He lies down on his straw pallet, the day's chores still in his muscles. Tomorrow, there will be more. Tomorrow, he will rise again, and slowly, the rhythm of duty will shape him, turning him from the boy who left the lane into something else entirely. New places feel both familiar and strangely distant. The first days of camp life pass like an unfinished song, melody without chorus, notes without resolution. He wakes each morning to the bugle's cry, the air damp with dew, and for a brief moment he forgets where he is. Only when he pushes aside the tent flap does reality rise to meet him. A sea of canvas stretched across the clearing, smoke rising in thin columns, men moving with the awkward shuffle of those still adjusting to new routines. It is a curious thing to live among so many and yet feel alone. The young man looks about, recognizing faces he has already seen day after day, yet unable to place names with half of them. Their voices blend into a steady murmur, like the sound of bees in a field, constant and low. He listens, catching fragments of stories about farms in the West, shops in bustling towns, and sisters left behind. The details differ, but the cadence of longing is the same. Each man carries a piece of home in his voice, tucked into words the way a keepsake is tucked into a pocket. The camp itself begins to transform before his eyes. What was once a scattering of tents becomes a grid, paths trodden firm between rows. Latrines are dug, cooking areas designated, guard posts marked out with crude stakes. Order creeps in, slow but steady, like ivy climbing a wall. And yet, beneath this order, there is still the rawness of transition. Men coughing in the night, fires sputtering when wood grows damp, tempers flaring when fatigue and boredom collide. For the young man, the greatest shock is not the work itself, but the sameness. Every morning feels like the one before. Rise, drill, haul, clean, eat, sleep. At first he resists, his mind leaping ahead to imagined battles, to the grand stories told in taverns. But the monotony presses down, shaping him in ways he does not yet recognize. Like water smoothing stone, the routine wears away impatience, leaving something harder, steadier. There are new sights that unsettle him. The hospital tent, for instance, its flap tied back to let in light, revealing rows of cots where men lie pale and silent. Some cough weakly, others stare blankly at the canvas above. The young man looks too long once, and the surgeon catches his eye with a weary shake of the head, as if to say, "You will be here too, in time." He turns away, unsettled by the thought. Yet there is comfort in small discoveries. The creek at the edge of camp, where water flows cool and clear over stones, becomes a place of refuge. He goes there at dusk, washing dust from his face, listening to the steady current. It reminds him of the stream near his childhood home, where he once skipped stones with friends. Now he kneels alone, letting the water slip through his fingers, carrying fragments of memory downstream. The people around him slowly take shape. The older man who showed him how to carry buckets introduces himself properly one evening. Miller, a farmer by trade. his skin weathered, his voice calm even when his words are sharp. Miller has a way of speaking that leaves no room for argument, yet carries no malice. He becomes a steady presence, an anchor in the shifting sea of camp life. There is Thomas, too, young, bright-eyed, eager, his enthusiasm both charming and dangerous. He speaks of home constantly, of fields and dances, of sisters who write long letters. He jokes often, though his laughter sometimes rings too loud, as if to drown out a hidden fear. The young man finds himself drawn to Thomas, perhaps because he reflects what he himself once was, before the weight of parting settled on him. At night, around the fire, the camp reveals its dual nature. Some men sing, voices blending in rough harmony, while others sit in silence, staring into flames as though seeking answers there. The young man listens to both, the joy and the quiet, and feels himself balanced between them. He does not yet sing, but he does not sit entirely apart either. He is learning to belong without losing himself. There are moments of quiet shock. A letter arrives for one man, bearing news of a brother lost in another regiment. The man reads it once, twice, then folds it carefully and places it in his breast pocket, saying nothing. That night, he digs furiously at the trench line, sweat pouring despite the cool air. The young man watches, understanding without words that grief finds expression in work when tears are unwelcome. Another evening, a horse breaks loose, charging through camp, scattering men and pots. The animal's eyes roll white with panic, its hooves striking sparks from stone. For a moment, chaos reigns. Then Miller steps forward, calm and steady, taking the reins with practiced hands. The horse quiets, shuddering but safe. The camp exhales. The young man feels a flicker of awe. Control is not about strength alone, but about presence, about being unshaken when the world stumbles. The camp's rhythm deepens. Days turn to weeks, each marked by drills in the open field. Muskets rise and fall in practiced unison, though often too slow, too clumsy. Officers bark corrections, their voices echoing across the lines. The young man feels the weight of his musket grow familiar in his hands, the click of its lock becoming almost a heartbeat. He learns to move when told, to stop when ordered, to trust the rhythm of command. At first, he resists the loss of individuality, chafing at the thought of being one among many. But then, during a drill, he feels something shift. The line moves smoothly, muskets gleaming, steps in time. For an instant, he is not alone but part of a larger body, breathing as one, moving as one. The realization startles him, yet steadies him too. Perhaps this is what survival will require, not the boldness of one, but the steadiness of many. Night comes again, as it always does. The stars stretch vast above the camp, indifferent yet constant. The young man lies awake, listening to the sounds around him. The cough of Thomas, the steady breathing of Miller, the distant murmur of guards. He thinks of home, of the bread, of the stone in his pocket. Yet he also thinks of the faces beside him, the voices that are becoming familiar. New surroundings no longer feel entirely strange. They are not yet home, but they are something. Perhaps a threshold, perhaps a bridge. He does not know where they lead, but he knows he will not walk them alone. A uniform changes more than the body it covers. There comes a morning when the camp seems transformed, though the sky above is the same pale blue, and the ground still smells of damp earth and smoke. The transformation lies not in the world itself, but in the way the men appear. For on this day, uniforms are issued. The young man lines up with the others, waiting as quartermasters pull garments from crates, blue wool coats, trousers, caps, shirts. The wool is heavy in the hand, coarse against the skin. When his turn comes, he receives a bundle tied with string. He unties it slowly, as though opening a gift he is not certain he wants. The fabric falls open, stiff and unyielding. It carries the scent of dye, of storage, of long journeys in wagons. He pulls the coat on. The sleeves hang a bit too long. The shoulders tug at his frame. The trousers bunch awkwardly at the knees. He feels swallowed, reshaped, confined. The boy who left home in work clothes, patched and softened by years of wear, now finds himself armored in fabric that does not yet know him. He touches the brass buttons, cold and gleaming. They catch the sunlight, reflecting back an image he barely recognizes. Around him, others wrestle with the same strangeness. Some grin, pleased by their reflection in polished canteens, already imagining themselves as soldiers in miniature portraits. Others tug and grumble, complaining about the scratch of wool, the stiffness of boots. Miller shrugs into his coat with resignation, muttering that wool is wool, whether for plowing fields or marching roads. Thomas twirls in his, laughing, though the cuffs nearly cover his hands. The young man feels something deeper stir. The uniform is not only clothing, it is a signal. With it, individuality begins to blur. When they stand together in line, blue coats aligned, the differences between farmer, clerk, teacher, and student begin to fade. They are becoming a body, a unit, a regiment. The realization is both unsettling and strangely comforting. Alone, each is fragile. Together, they are something larger. Still, the shock of the transformation lingers. He remembers his mother straightening his collar on the morning he left. That collar belonged to him, a familiar garment softened by her hands. This collar belongs to the army. It scratches his neck, and when he tries to adjust it, he finds no comfort in the motion. He is learning that comfort is a luxury soldiers seldom know. The day grows warm, and the wool grows heavier. Sweat collects at the base of his spine, trickling beneath layers that do not breathe. The sergeant marches them into formation, barking orders sharper than usual. They step, stumble, correct themselves. Boots clatter in uneven rhythm. Dust rises in clouds, coating their faces until sweat and powder form a gritty paste. Still, the line continues, driven forward by command. At noon, they collapse under shade where it can be found. Jackets are shed, caps tossed aside. The young man stretches on the ground, staring at the blue fabric crumpled beside him. It looks lifeless there, an empty shell. Yet when he pulls it back on, it molds him again, insisting on a posture straighter, a bearing more rigid. The uniform demands something of him, even when he resists. Miller leans over, tapping the brass button on his chest. "Shiny now," he says dryly, "but dull soon enough." Buttons tarnish like men. The words hang, half jest, half truth. The young man runs his thumb across the button, wondering how long it will gleam before the dullness of mud and smoke takes it. Thomas, ever restless, jokes about how the girls back home will swoon when they see him in blue. His laugh is infectious, but beneath it lies the same unease that all feel. The awareness that this coat is not a costume for parades, but a garment meant for mud, for rain, perhaps for burial. That quiet understanding hums beneath the surface, unspoken but present. The evening brings inspection. Officers stride along the lines, eyes sharp for details, coats buttoned properly, caps square on heads, rifles aligned. The young man stands rigid, heart pounding, though he has done nothing wrong. When the officer pauses before him, adjusting the angle of his cap, he feels the weight of scrutiny. He is no longer just himself. He is a soldier in formation, and any flaw reflects on all. The inspection passes, yet its echo lingers. He lies awake later, coat folded beside him, listening to the camp settle into night. He thinks of how clothing, so ordinary at home, has become a symbol here. A shirt can no longer be just a shirt. It is uniform or not uniform, order or disorder, belonging or apart. The shift is subtle, yet profound. There are soft mercies, too. The coat, heavy as it is, warms him when night grows cold. The cap shields his eyes from the midday sun. The boots, though blistering at first, begin to mold to his feet, carrying him farther each day. The very discomfort that marks them as foreign will, in time, turn to familiarity. He knows this, because already the scratch of wool seems less sharp than yesterday. One night, Thomas passes around a small mirror, cracked at the edge. Each man peers into it, laughing softly at his reflection in blue. When it is the young man's turn, he holds the mirror carefully. The face staring back is both known and strange, eyes the same, yet shadowed, jaw the same, yet set more firmly. And above it all, the cap, tilted just so, marking him as something new. He cannot decide if he likes the sight or fears it. Perhaps both. And so he learns the lesson hidden in the weight of fabric, that transformation does not arrive with fanfare, but with slow adjustments, with seams that rub until they settle, with boots that blister until they toughen. The uniform is not yet second skin, but it is becoming so. And in that process, he feels himself shifting too. Colon illness and hunger creep in without a word. The rhythm of camp grows steady, bugles at dawn, drills in the morning, meals that come when they come. But beneath that surface regularity, strains begin to show. They are not dramatic at first. No cannon fire, no clash of steel. Just the coughs that echo longer in the night, the empty feeling in stomachs after supper, the way men shift uneasily on their pallets, unable to find comfort. The young man notices it most in Thomas. Once so bright-eyed, full of endless energy, Thomas now moves slower in the mornings, rubbing at his chest as though trying to ease something caught there. His laugh, once quick and full, comes less often, replaced by silence that hangs too heavy. He brushes off concern, claiming only that the night air is damp, that a bit of rest will set him right. But the young man hears the truth in the cough that rattles through the tent at midnight, thin and raw. Food, too, becomes a daily reminder of limits. Rations are issued in measured portions: salt pork, hardtack, beans. At first, the novelty of soldiers' food carried its own interest. Cracking hardtack with the butt of a rifle, boiling coffee in battered tins, trading morsels like children trading sweets. But novelty fades quickly. The hardtack grows harder, sometimes alive with weevils, though hunger makes the men brush them away and chew regardless. The pork, salted near to stone, must be soaked for hours before it can be eaten, and even then it sits heavily, leaving thirst unquenched. The young man remembers meals at home, his mother's bread, fresh from the oven, butter melting across its crust, apples baked until sweet. That memory now feels like a dream, too distant to touch. Here, each bite is not about pleasure, but survival, and survival tastes bitter. One evening, as they sit around the fire, Miller explains it simply. The army feeds you enough to march and fight, not enough to sing about. He chews slowly, his jaw working steadily. You'll learn to value every mouthful, even the ones that break your teeth. His voice carries no complaint, only acceptance. That, somehow, is harder to bear. The strain is not only of body, but of mind. Waiting wears at men. They stand watch on the edge of camp, peering into the dark, where every rustle of leaves could be friend or foe, or nothing at all. Hours pass, marked only by the crunch of boots on soil, the shifting of a musket from one weary shoulder to another. In those long stretches of silence, thoughts wander homeward, and loneliness creeps in like cold. Letters help when they arrive. A folded sheet, ink smudged by hurried hands, can brighten a man's entire week. The young man receives one from his sister, written in careful script. She tells him of the garden, of the neighbor's new foal, of the way the church bells sounded at Easter. Ordinary things, but in camp, such words are treasures. He reads it twice, 3 times, then folds it neatly and tucks it into his pocket with the stone. Together, they form a talisman against despair. But not everyone receives letters. Some wait in vain, day after day, until hope itself grows thin. The young man sees one recruit tear open a bundle, only to find nothing with his name. His shoulders sag, and that night he lies staring at the tent roof, eyes unblinking. Silence can wound as deeply as words. Illness spreads quietly. First one man leaves for the hospital tent, then another. Soon, the rows of cots fill. The surgeon, his sleeves rolled up, moves briskly from one to the next, his face a mask of fatigue. The air inside the hospital hangs heavy with disinfectant, but it cannot disguise the sour scent of fever and fear. Some recover, some do not. Each absence leaves a space in camp, a bedroll unrolled, a voice missing from the evening fire. Hunger sharpens tempers. Men snap at one another over trifles, a misplaced spoon, a blanket pulled too far in the night. Then, just as quickly, they apologize, shame-faced, knowing the anger is not truly meant. Strain distorts kindness, yet kindness returns stubbornly, like grass pushing through stone. The young man begins to feel the weight himself. His stomach knots with emptiness that food does not ease. His back aches from drills repeated too often on ground too hard. His throat burns from smoke. His hands crack from cold water at the creek. Yet beneath it all, he discovers a resilience he did not expect. Each morning, he rises again. Each night, he sleeps, however lightly. The strain does not break him. It bends him, shaping him into something different. One night, as he sits with Miller and Thomas, a sudden rain sweeps through camp. The fire sputters, steam rising. Men scramble to cover supplies, cursing as water soaks their coats. The young man tilts his face to the sky, letting the rain wash over him. It is cold, yes, but also clean. For a moment, he feels lighter, as though the strain has been lifted by the storm. Afterward, he and Thomas share a piece of bread, soggy but welcome. Thomas manages a smile, faint but real. Still beats plowing fields in summer heat, he says softly. The young man laughs, surprised at himself, the sound carrying into the damp night. The silent strain of illness, hunger, and waiting continues, of course. It does not vanish with one storm or one laugh, but the men endure it together, and in that endurance, bonds deepen, quiet but unbreakable. Stories echo softly, hinting at trials ahead. Even in a camp filled with the shuffle of boots and the clatter of tin plates, silence can fall with surprising speed. It happens most often at night, when men gather around the fires, voices low, eyes drawn to the flames, as if each spark carries memory. That is when the stories come. The young man, seated between Miller and Thomas, hears them first as fragments. A corporal from another company tells of a skirmish upriver, his words clipped, as though each syllable costs him breath. Another speaks of cavalry charging across open fields, sabers flashing, horses screaming as they fell. The details vary, shifting like smoke, but the weight behind them is the same. These are not tavern tales polished for laughter. These are recollections rough-edged and raw, offered only because silence would be heavier still. At first, the young man listens wide-eyed, drawn to every detail. He imagines himself in the scenes described, smoke thick enough to blind, ground shaking beneath cannon fire, men moving in confusion. He feels the old boyish eagerness stir, the thrill of what it might mean to stand in such a place, to be tested. But as the stories unfold, he catches the undertones, the pauses too long, the eyes turned away, the voice that falters. It is then he begins to hear the echo beneath the words, the echo of grief. Miller, steady as ever, seldom tells stories of his own. When pressed, he only says, "You'll see soon enough. No need for me to color it before then." But his silence speaks volumes. It is not bravado that keeps him from describing past fights. It is memory too heavy to lift into words. The young man begins to understand that what is left unsaid often carries more weight than what is spoken. Thomas, on the other hand, absorbs the tales like kindling catching flame. His questions tumble out, his imagination racing ahead of his experience. He wants to know what the cannons sound like up close, whether a man can truly hear orders amid the smoke, if courage feels different when tested. The older men answer with shrugs or brief nods. Sometimes they smile at his eagerness. Sometimes they look away. The young man watches Thomas, recognizing himself in that hunger, yet wishing he could shield him from the truth that lies ahead. The letters from home become another source of distant echoes. News travels slowly, but when it arrives, it carries the voice of a world untouched by camp life. One man reads aloud from his sister's letter about a harvest dance, lanterns strung between trees, music drifting across the fields. For a moment, the campfire seems to glow warmer, the men smiling at images of fiddles and laughter. Then the letter ends, folded carefully, and the silence afterward feels deeper than before. Another man receives word of a neighbor who enlisted and has already fallen. He reads the letter once, twice, then passes it into the fire without comment. The paper curls, blackens, turns to ash, and the men watch as if witnessing more than paper burning. The echo of that loss ripples outward, though no one names it. The young man begins to notice how stories shape the camp. Some tales lift spirits, a clever trick played on an officer, a cook's disaster turned into laughter, a horse that refused to cross a stream until bribed with sugar. These stories bring chuckles, shoulders loosening, eyes brightening. Others weigh heavy. Accounts of hunger so severe men boiled leather, of winter nights when frostbitten toes turned black, of friends who vanished into the smoke of battle and never returned. Those stories settle over the fire like a shroud, leaving men to stare into the flames until the embers dim. One evening, Thomas presses the young man to tell a story. "You must have one," he insists, "something from home at least." The young man hesitates. He has never thought of himself as a storyteller, but with all eyes on him, he begins. He speaks of the river near his town, where he and his friends once built a raft from barrels and planks. The raft sank almost immediately, dumping them into the water, but the memory of laughter stayed. He tells it simply, his voice halting at first, then steadier as he sees smiles spread around the fire. It is no tale of war, but it is enough. Later, Miller leans close. "Hold on to those stories," he says quietly. "The ones from before. They'll keep you when the others grow too heavy." The young man nods, understanding more than Miller knows. Already, he feels the weight of borrowed memories pressing on him, the echoes of battles he has not yet seen. The camp grows quieter with each passing night, not because men run out of stories, but because they learn to listen differently. Each word carries echoes now, of home, of loss, of fear, of endurance. The young man learns to hear not only the surface but the undertone, the silence beneath the sound. And in that listening, he feels himself changing, becoming attuned to the unspoken language of soldiers. One night, as the fire dwindles, Thomas whispers, "Do you think we'll have stories like that soon?" His voice is filled with both anticipation and dread. The young man does not answer immediately. He looks at the embers, glowing faintly, fragile, yet stubborn. At last he says, "Soon enough." The words carry no excitement, no warning, only truth. Friendship arrives quietly, found in simple gestures. The days blur into one another, stitched together by drills, chores, and the steady rhythm of camp. Yet amid the sameness, one thread begins to stand out, bright against the dull weave. The first true companion. Not a comrade by command or a neighbor by chance, but a friend by choice. It begins with a small act, hardly worth noticing at first. The young man struggles with the strap of his haversack, leather stiff and unyielding, the buckle refusing to catch. Frustration burns hotter than the midday sun. Then Miller, ever steady, steps over and takes the strap without a word. His hands, calloused from years in the fields, work deftly until the buckle clicks into place. He hands it back, offering only a brief nod. No praise, no lecture, just help. That is all. And yet, in that simple act, something settles. Later, it happens again. The young man fumbles with his rifle, the ramrod catching as he tries to seat the charge during drill. Before the sergeant can bark, Thomas leans close, whispering advice, showing him the trick of angling the barrel just so. The correction is minor, but the smile that follows is wide, full of warmth. "There you go," Thomas says, as if the matter were no more than a button fastened. Friendship in camp does not come with speeches or solemn oaths. It comes in these gestures: a piece of bread shared when rations run thin, a blanket shifted just enough to cover another's shoulder, a joke told softly to break the heaviness of silence. The young man learns quickly that such gestures matter more than any flag or order. They are the glue that holds men together when everything else strains to pull them apart. Miller's role becomes clear. He is the anchor, the one who steadies others not by force, but by calm presence. When tempers flare, his voice cuts through, not loud but firm, like the weight of a stone dropped into restless water. Men listen because he has weather in his eyes, lines etched by seasons of toil and loss. He rarely smiles, but when he does, it feels earned, like sunlight breaking through cloud. Thomas is different. He is light where Miller is stone, quick with laughter, eager with questions. His stories tumble out, some true, some embroidered, but all delivered with energy that lifts even weary shoulders. He jokes about the sergeant's mustache, about the cook's soup, about the way hardtack could double as paving stones. The young man finds himself laughing too, though the humor sometimes hides a tremor. Together, the three of them form an unlikely balance: Miller with his seasoned steadiness, Thomas with his restless joy, and the young man, still learning, still shaping, somewhere in between. They share chores, share watch, share silence, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the line between strangers and companions dissolves. One evening, the young man returns from water detail to find his blanket missing. Panic grips him for a moment. Blankets are precious, and the nights grow cold. He searches frantically, only to discover it draped neatly across his pallet, dried and folded. Thomas, grinning sheepishly, admits he pulled it from the line when rain threatened. "Couldn't have you shivering all night," he says simply. The young man feels a warmth far deeper than the blanket can provide. Another day, Miller hands him a piece of tobacco, though he rarely shares. "For the nerves," Miller mutters. The young man has never chewed before, but he accepts it, tucking it in his cheek, grimacing at the bitterness. Miller chuckles softly, the sound rare, almost tender. The gesture means more than the gift itself. It is trust, recognition, inclusion. The soft shock arrives when they stand picket duty together for the first time. The night is cold, moonlight filtering through bare branches. Every rustle in the brush sets the young man's heart racing. He grips his musket too tightly, knuckles white. Then he hears Miller's voice, low and steady. "Easy." The dark makes more noise than it holds beside him. Thomas hums a faint tune, so quiet it barely rises above the wind. Between the two of them, the anchor and the flame, the young man feels his fear ease. The night remains long, but he is not alone in it. Friendship does not erase strain. Hunger still gnaws, coughs still echo, tempers still snap. But now, there is laughter shared across the fire, comfort found in silence, resilience drawn from the simple fact of companionship. The young man realizes that war may strip men of many things: comfort, certainty, safety. But friendship is something it cannot take without consent. And so long as companions stand beside him, he feels stronger than he thought possible. That night, as they settle into the tent, Thomas mutters sleepily, "Funny, isn't it? We didn't choose this, but here we are. Like brothers." Almost Miller snorts, rolling over, but does not deny it. The young man lies awake a while longer, staring at the canvas above, feeling the truth of Thomas's words settle into him. Another struggle becomes a mirror to your own. There are days when the camp feels like a stage, each man playing his role with practiced lines: drill, eat, march, rest. Yet beneath the repetition, small dramas unfold, quiet but piercing. The young man begins to notice them, and in noticing, he sees his own reflection more clearly than he ever expected. It begins with Thomas. His cough, once brushed off with jokes, grows harsher. During morning drill, he falters, stumbling over a root, breath catching ragged in his chest. The sergeant snaps, ready to scold, but the sound that comes out of Thomas stops even him. A dry, tearing cough that bends the boy nearly double. For a moment, the line of soldiers hesitates, then straightens again as Thomas waves them off, insisting he is fine. But the young man sees the truth in his pale face, the way his hands tremble when he reloads his musket. Later that day, in the shade of the mess tent, Thomas admits quietly, "Doctor says my lungs aren't sound. Might send me home if it doesn't clear." His voice carries both hope and shame. The young man wants to tell him that going home is no dishonor, that survival is not weakness, but he cannot bring himself to say it. He knows too well how Thomas sees him: strong, steady, unyielding. To admit fear would feel like breaking something fragile between them. And yet, in Thomas's struggle, the young man sees his own. He remembers the night before leaving, when fear gnawed at him as he tied his boots. He remembers the letter in his pocket, folded against loneliness. He knows what it means to doubt, to falter, to wish for escape. Thomas is not weaker than him. Thomas is simply showing what they all carry inside. Miller offers perspective in his blunt way. "Every man has his breaking point," he says one evening, carving at a piece of wood with his pocket knife. "Doesn't matter if it's a bullet, fever, or the waiting. Point is, you don't know yours until you meet it. And when you do, you'll see yourself plain as day." The knife scrapes softly against the wood, each stroke measured, as though his words are being etched into the air itself. The young man takes those words with him to guard duty. Standing in the half-light of dawn, musket resting against his shoulder, he watches a fellow sentry a few yards away. The man is older, hair streaked with gray, his stance weary but unyielding. The young man studies him, how his eyes scan the tree line, how his fingers tap the stock of his musket in rhythm with his breath. He realizes with sudden clarity, this man too is afraid. But fear does not keep him from standing his post. It is a revelation, simple yet profound. The mirror is everywhere. In Thomas's cough, in the older sentry's tapping fingers, in Miller's weary eyes. Each man reflects a different angle of the same truth. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the carrying of it. One afternoon, a recruit barely 16 years old collapses during drill, his musket falling with a clatter. The others laugh at first, thinking him clumsy. But when he does not rise, laughter fades. The sergeant rushes over, kneeling to lift the boy's head. The child's eyes roll back, lips pale. He has fainted from heat and hunger. They carry him to the shade, water poured over his brow. When he stirs, confused and ashamed, the young man feels a shock of recognition. That could be me. That could be any of us. The camp is full of such moments, small cracks in the mask of soldiering. A man breaks down quietly in the dark after receiving no letters from home. Another hides trembling hands by holding his tin cup too tightly. Another hums endlessly, the same tune over and over, as though afraid of silence. Each time the young man sees his own reflection, his own doubts, his own frailties, laid bare in others. And then, one evening, it comes full circle. During inspection, his musket jams, the mechanism stiff. Panic flashes. An officer's eyes are on him, the line waiting. For a heartbeat, he feels the shame Thomas must have felt when his cough betrayed him. Then Miller's hand, subtle and quick, adjusts the lock. The musket clicks, smooth again. The officer passes without comment. Relief floods him, but more than relief, he feels kinship. He is not above weakness. He is not exempt. He is simply fortunate that someone steadied him. That night, as they sit around the fire, Thomas teases him gently about his fumbling. The young man laughs, genuinely, and admits, "I nearly dropped the thing." The honesty feels freeing, a weight lifted. Thomas grins, coughs lightly, and says, "Then we're even." In that moment, mirrors turn to windows, showing not only reflections of weakness, but the possibility of connection through them. The lesson settles deep. Strength is not in hiding one's strain, but in recognizing it in others and offering steadiness when they falter. Just as Miller steadied him, just as he steadies Thomas, just as each man steadies the next. It is a chain of mirrors, stretching down the line, reflecting not perfection, but endurance. Small kindnesses warm hearts when strength alone fails. The longer the young man remains in camp, the clearer it becomes that life is measured less by grand victories and more by small mercies. No one speaks of them in official reports. They will not be carved into stone or sung in parades. Yet these moments, tiny, often overlooked, become the true sustenance of soldiering. It begins with something as humble as a cup of coffee. Rations have been stretched thin for weeks, beans boiled again and again until the liquid is more tint than taste. One gray morning, Miller produces a small pouch from his coat, saved from some earlier trade. He brews it quietly, without announcement. The scent rises through the camp like incense, sharp and rich, cutting through damp air. When he passes a tin cup to the young man, steaming and dark, it feels like a feast. The warmth spreads through his chest, chasing away chill and hunger alike. No words are spoken, but in that sip lies gratitude too deep for speech. Another evening, Thomas hums as he prepares a pot over the fire. Into the salted pork and beans, he tosses a handful of wild onions he dug from the edge of the woods, pale bulbs carried in his pocket like treasure. The taste transforms the meal. Still rough, still plain, but touched with brightness. The men laugh, exaggerating their praise, but their eyes soften as they eat. It is not the onion alone that matters. It is the gesture, the effort to bring comfort where little can be found. The young man begins to notice such mercies everywhere. A blanket shared on a bitter night. A canteen offered during drill, though water is scarce. A letter read aloud, not kept private, so that others without news might feel included in a stranger's joy. These are not heroic acts in the eyes of the world, but in the closed circle of camp, they shine brighter than any medal. One day, during fatigue duty, the young man cuts his hand on a splintered log. The wound is not deep, but the blood flows stubbornly, staining his sleeve. He curses softly, embarrassed. Before he can fetch cloth, a fellow soldier, one he barely knows, tears a strip from his own shirt and binds it. "Better my shirt than your arm," the man says simply. The young man stares at him, realizing he may never remember the man's name, but he will never forget the mercy of that moment. The soft shock comes with illness. A boy no older than Thomas is struck with fever, his body burning hot beneath thin blankets. The surgeon can do little but mutter and mix bitter drafts. The boy's tent mates take turns sitting with him, dampening cloths, spooning water to cracked lips. He raves in delirium, calling for his mother. None of them can answer that cry, but they keep vigil, refusing to let him suffer alone. The young man sits one night, holding the boy's hand until dawn. The boy does not survive, yet the mercy was real. He did not leave the world without touch, without presence. And in that, there is dignity. Miller, with his weathered wisdom, explains it one night while whittling by the fire. "Battles test your courage," he says, "but camp life tests your humanity. Win the first, you might live a day. Win the second, you might live with yourself afterward." The young man lets the words sink in, feeling their truth. Kindness also carries humor, small sparks against the dark. When a shipment of supplies arrives, the men discover a crate of mismatched socks, some too long, some too short, none in pairs. Laughter ripples through the camp as men parade their odd stockings, pretending to strut like generals. For an hour, the misery of blisters and damp boots is replaced by shared amusement. The socks are poor, but the mercy is rich. One cold night, the young man wakes to find his blanket slipping off. He pulls it back and realizes it was Thomas who had shifted it, even in sleep, making sure he was covered. The gesture is instinctive, unconscious, yet it moves him more than grand speeches ever could. He lies awake for a while, listening to Thomas's breathing, struck by the quiet loyalty forged in hardship. The young man, too, learns to give. When he receives a letter from home describing the birth of a neighbor's child, he reads it aloud, letting others smile at the description of tiny fingers and first cries. When he finds an extra onion in the field, he shares it with Thomas for the pot. When a recruit drops his musket in drill and blushes with shame, the young man cracks a quiet joke, easing the sting. Each act, small as it seems, weaves him deeper into the fabric of the group. And so he comes to understand that mercy is not weakness. It is strength of another kind, the kind that builds when muscle fails, the kind that carries men through silence, hunger, and waiting. The army may demand obedience, the enemy may demand courage, but only mercy demands humanity. And humanity is what they cling to, night after weary night. The hardest task is holding steady in silence. The drills, the marches, the small mercies, these all prepare a man in their own way. But nothing quite equals the test of picket duty, that long stretch of time when he must stand alone on the edge of things, watching, waiting, breathing in silence heavier than cannon smoke. The young man learns this lesson when his company is ordered to the perimeter. The march there is uneventful, a steady trudge through meadows rimmed with bare trees, but the mood is taut. Each man knows they are stepping into the thin line between friend and foe. They dig shallow posts, string a crude cordon of watchfires, and then scatter in twos along the wooded edge. The young man finds himself paired with Miller. Thomas is sent further down the line, his cough light enough that the officers trust him for now. The placement is quiet, too quiet. The air is still, the only sound the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. A crow calls once, harsh and jarring, then the woods swallow the sound. At first, the young man thinks the hardest part will be fear. His imagination paints every shadow as an enemy creeping forward, every snap of twig as a musket cocked. His pulse quickens, palms slick on the musket stock. But soon he realizes it is not fear that tests him most. It is time. The hours crawl. Muscles ache from standing. Eyes strain at the shifting dark. Mind inventing shapes where none exist. Miller senses his unease. In his calm way, he mutters, "The night's full of liars. Wind says one thing, squirrels say another. Best not to believe everything your ears tell you." The words are meant as comfort, but they also serve as warning. Patience, the young man realizes, is the true weapon here. Fire too soon, and you might kill nothing but silence. Wait too long, and silence might kill you. The night stretches endlessly. Sometimes, faint across the no man's land, he catches the glimmer of another fire. Confederate pickets, no more than shadows, watching with the same weary dread. Between them lies only the hush of woods, an invisible boundary drawn by war. Men stare across it for hours, each as afraid of breaking the stillness as they are of what might come if it is broken. Now and then, shots ring out along the line, nervous bursts, sparked by a branch snapping or a shape moving too quickly. Each time, the camp stirs, muskets lifted, breath held. Then the silence returns, heavier for being disturbed. The young man grips his musket tighter, heart pounding, imagining the chaos if the woods suddenly erupted in fire. Yet nothing comes. The waiting continues. Soft shock arrives not in gunfire, but in small revelations. He notices the stars overhead, sharp and brilliant in the absence of city light. He notices how Miller stands with shoulders relaxed, his breathing even, as though the night is no different from a barnyard at home. He realizes that steadiness is not born of absence of fear, but of choosing to breathe through it. Dawn creeps in slowly, painting the horizon with pale light. The men stagger back to camp, eyes red, steps heavy. The young man feels as though he has aged years in one night, yet beneath the exhaustion lies pride. He held his post. He did not fire at shadows. He endured the silence without letting it break him. Days later, the test repeats. Another watch, another night. This time, he is paired with Thomas. The boy's cough rattles now and then, but he insists he can manage. They stand together, side by side, eyes straining into dark. Hours pass. Then, a sudden rustle. Both freeze. The young man's finger twitches on the trigger. Thomas leans forward, whispering, "What is it?" The sound comes again, closer. Then, into the moonlight, steps a deer, its antlers catching the silver glow. Relief floods them both. Thomas laughs softly, though it breaks into cough. "Imagine dying for a deer," he whispers. The young man laughs too, the sound shaky, but it carries the sweetness of survival. And so he learns that holding the line is not about heroics. It is about enduring monotony without surrender, about standing through fear without wasting courage, about seeing deer instead of phantoms. It is, in its own way, the purest soldiering he has yet known. When he lies down after, exhaustion pulls him under almost instantly. In his dreams, the woods stretch endless, shadows moving just beyond sight. But when he wakes, he remembers Miller's calm, Thomas's laugh, and the pale deer vanishing into brush. These memories shape him more than drills ever could. Weather writes its own chapter in every life. Long before the young man hears his first true volley in battle, he learns to respect the oldest general of them all, the weather. No officer commands it, no strategy bends it. It comes as it wishes, and soldiers must march to its tune. The lesson begins on a morning of heavy rain. The camp awakes to dripping canvas, water seeping through seams, blankets damp and clothes sticking cold to skin. Fires sputter, refusing to catch. Men curse softly, striking sparks that die in wet kindling. Breakfast is little more than hardtack chewed in silence, faces pale with chill. The young man sits beneath the sagging edge of his tent, rain running down his collar, and realizes that misery can fall from the sky as easily as it rises from the ground. Marching in rain proves worse. Mud clings to boots, sucking at every step, slowing progress to a crawl. Muskets grow slick, powder unreliable. The young man feels the weight of water in every seam of his coat, dragging him down, chilling him through. Yet no order pauses the march. The column lurches forward, each man bent against the downpour. He wonders briefly if battles are lost not by bullets, but by storms that break men before shots are fired. When the sun returns, it comes cruelly. Heat presses down, relentless. Sweat soaks wool coats until they grow heavy, salt stinging eyes. Men stumble in the dust, tongues swollen with thirst. Water barrels run low, the creek fouled by so many washing in its flow. The young man licks dry lips, remembering the cool shade of orchards at home. Here, shade is scarce, mercy rarer still. Soft shock arrives one afternoon in the form of wind. A sudden gale whips across camp, tearing tents loose, scattering blankets, sending hats tumbling. Men chase after possessions, shouting above the roar. The young man clutches his own cap, watching as canvas billows like sails and collapses into mud. The storm passes quickly, but the ruin lingers, beds soaked, fires drowned, tempers flaring. That night, he sleeps on damp ground, teeth chattering though the stars shine clear above. Miller, ever the philosopher, remarks, "You can fight a man. You can't fight the sky. Best you can do is bend with it." He shows the young man how to trench around the tent, how to lash corners tighter, how to store powder in oilcloth. "Preparation's the only defiance we get," he says. The young man listens, learning that resilience lies not in strength alone, but in humility before forces greater than oneself. Thomas tries to find humor in the miseries. "Rain keeps the lice down," he says with a grin, scratching at his collar. "Cold keeps the stink down. Heat makes you too tired to argue." His laughter is thin but contagious, rippling through weary faces. The young man chuckles too, surprised at how the joke eases his spirit, if only for a moment. The seasons shift, each bringing its trial. Autumn's chill stiffens fingers until muskets slip. Winter threatens frostbite, water freezing in canteens. Spring's thaw turns roads into rivers of mud, wagons sinking axle deep. Each turn reminds the young man that the weather is not background, it is battlefield. One dawn, frost coats the camp in silver. Breath hangs in the air, tents glisten with ice. The beauty is breathtaking, almost holy. Yet beauty does not warm fingers or ease hunger. He breaks ice on the creek to fetch water, watching shards drift like glass. Later, when the sun rises higher, the frost melts into muck, soaking boots again. Beauty and misery walk hand in hand. Another night, lightning splits the sky, thunder rolling like cannon fire. Men startle awake, instinctively grabbing muskets. For an instant, the camp is lit stark white, faces pale and fearful. The young man feels his heart leap, convinced battle has come. Then the rain pours, drenching all, and they realize the enemy is only the storm. Still, the fear lingers. Even false fire can rattle nerves. Over time, the young man comes to measure days by weather rather than calendar. That was the week of rain, he hears men say, or the frost month near froze us solid. Dates blur, but skies remain etched in memory. The weather writes its own chapters, relentless, impartial, unforgettable. There is quiet comfort, too. On rare, gentle evenings, when the breeze carries the scent of pine and the stars shimmer clear, the men sit in easy silence. The young man feels peace then, fragile but real, as if the sky itself offers reprieve. He learns to treasure those moments, for they are few and fleeting. One night, lying on his back beneath a canvas roof patched with waxed cloth, he listens to rain tapping steady as a lullaby. For once, he is dry, thanks to Miller's trenches. Thomas snores softly beside him, the sound oddly reassuring. The young man closes his eyes, letting the rhythm of the rain carry him toward sleep. Misery and mercy mingle, as they always do. Long marches become meditation with steady breath. There is a sound that lingers in memory long after the voices fade, long after the fires burn out. It is the sound of boots striking earth in endless rhythm. 1,000 feet, falling together, grinding soil into dust, or slapping mud into muck. The march becomes the drumbeat of the army, and the young man soon finds himself moving to its measure. The first march feels like punishment. Dawn is barely broken when orders come, and men scramble to pack haversacks, shouldering muskets still cold from night's dew. The air smells of damp canvas and wood smoke half extinguished. Soon, the column forms, a line of blue stretching along the road, shoulder to shoulder, packs heavy, muskets clattering. Then, with the cry of "Forward," they set off. At first, spirits remain high. Men sing tunes from home, voices ragged but loud. Jokes are shouted down the line, laughter carrying above the tramp of boots. Thomas sings the longest, though his cough cuts verses short. Miller walks in silence, his eyes forward, conserving energy. The young man joins in awkwardly, carried by the current of voices. For a while, the road feels lighter, but the miles stretch on and the singing dies. The sun rises higher, pressing down on wool coats until they steam. Dust swirls, sticking to sweat, coating tongues. Packs grow heavier with each step, straps biting into shoulders. The young man's feet burn, blisters blooming unseen inside boots. He shifts the musket from one hand to the other, arms aching. The rhythm of the march becomes mechanical, left, right, left, until thought itself feels worn thin. It is here that he learns a strange truth. Exhaustion dulls fear. When the body is consumed by ache, the mind cannot dwell on what may lie ahead. Instead, it narrows to the next step, the next breath. The march becomes meditation, though no man would call it that. In the steady beat of boots, he finds an odd kind of calm. Soft shock arrives in small moments along the road. A wagon wheel breaks, halting the column. Men slump by the roadside, some swearing, some sleeping instantly where they sit. The young man watches as a mule collapses from heat, its driver weeping openly as it refuses to rise. The sight unsettles him more than he expects. Animals, too, bear the burden, and sometimes they cannot bear it. The march resumes, leaving the mule behind. Its stillness haunts him long after. Another day, the march takes them through a town. Civilians line the road, faces wary. Some cheer softly, offering cups of water. Others turn away, shutters closing. The young man sees a child waving, a bright ribbon in her hair. He raises his hand in return, smiling despite himself. The moment is fleeting, but it breaks the monotony. Humanity remains, even along roads ground down by war. The march tests more than muscle. It tests patience, endurance, the willingness to follow without knowing the destination. Men grumble at the officers, guessing where they go, why they turn this way instead of that. Rumors travel faster than the column. Talk of an enemy camp, talk of supply depots, talk of nothing at all. The young man learns to stop listening. The road itself is answer enough. Night brings little relief. Camps are pitched hastily, fires small and brief. Supper is hardtack, gnawed with sore jaws, and water that tastes of mud. Sleep comes fitful, muscles cramping, dreams filled with the endless beat of boots. Then, before dawn, the bugle sounds again, and the march resumes. Time loses meaning, measured only by sunrises and blisters. Miller offers quiet wisdom. Don't think of the miles, he advises. Think of the next hill, the next bend. Break it down, and you'll get there. The young man follows his counsel, learning to see the road not as endless punishment, but as a string of smaller trials. Each bend passed becomes a victory, each hill crested a relief. In this way, the march becomes survivable. Thomas tries to lift spirits by inventing songs, nonsense verses shouted between coughs. Some men groan, others laugh. The young man finds himself smiling, even as his legs throb. Humor, he realizes, is as necessary as rations. Without it, the march would crush them. One afternoon, rain begins to fall, first light, then heavy. Mud replaces dust. Boots sink ankle deep, sucking with each step. Progress slows, men cursing, slipping. The young man stumbles, nearly falling, but Miller's hand steadies him. Eyes up, Miller says. Road's the same whether it's mud or stone. Just keep stepping. The words carry him farther than his legs alone could. At the end of that march, the camp is nothing more than sodden ground. Fires sputter, tents sag. Yet as the young man lies on his damp blanket, he feels a strange pride. He endured. The march did not defeat him. Tomorrow it will come again, and he will face it again. The endless march becomes more than movement across land. It becomes movement within. Each step strips away illusions, leaving only the core of endurance. The young man begins to understand. War is not only fought with muskets, but with feet, with backs, with lungs. Survival is measured in miles as much as in shots. Rumors and restless skies gather before change. The march has its own rhythm, but even rhythm can shift. One morning, the young man wakes to a camp unsettled. Men move with sharper voices, their eyes darting more quickly. The air itself seems charged, as if the clouds overhead carry not just weather, but omen. He does not need to be told. something is coming. It begins with whispers, carried faster than any courier. Word travels along the line of tents, enemy movements across the river, reinforcements arriving, generals riding with maps rolled tight under their arms. No one knows the source, but every man repeats it. Some say battle is imminent. Others swear it is merely a feint. Still others mutter about ambushes, traps, betrayals. The rumors swirl, impossible to pin down, yet impossible to ignore. The young man listens, trying to discern truth from noise. He remembers Miller's words. Camp talk is like wind. Best not to chase it. And yet he cannot help but feel his pulse quicken. He thinks of Thomas, still coughing, and wonders if the boy could withstand what might be ahead. He thinks of himself, too, and whether he is ready to face what stories have only hinted. The officers offer little clarity. Orders are given, then countermanded. Packs are ordered ready, then left untouched. Drills resume, though everyone senses they are only to occupy restless bodies. Men mutter under their breath as they shoulder muskets once more, forming lines that feel brittle, uncertain. The young man feels it too. The edge of waiting, sharper than fear itself. The skies mirror the mood. Clouds gather thick, shifting like armies unseen. The wind grows restless, tugging at canvas, rattling tin cups. At dusk, thunder rolls far away, like distant cannon. Men glance at one another, some laughing uneasily, others silent. It is only weather, yet the sound stirs dread. Nature and rumor march hand in hand, conspiring to unsettle hearts. One evening, Thomas brings word that a neighboring regiment saw skirmishers in the woods. He tells it with wide eyes, his voice hushed. They say shots were fired. A man was hit. The young man asks who told him. Thomas shrugs, admitting it came from someone who heard it from someone. The uncertainty does not matter. The fear does. All night, men lie, awake, waiting for an alarm that never comes. Soft shock arrives in the form of absence. At roll call one morning, a man does not answer. Whispers fly. Desertion, some say. Capture, others insist. His bedroll is gone, his musket missing. The young man feels the absence like a hole in the line. It is not just that one man has vanished. It is that possibility has become real. If he could slip away, who else might? And what does that say about those who remain? Miller addresses it bluntly as they clean rifles by the fire. Desertion's another rumor. Spreads faster than truth. He's gone, and that's all. Doesn't change the rest of us. His words are steady, but the young man sees the flicker in his eyes. Even Miller cannot dismiss the unease entirely. Days stretch, each heavy with expectation. The men live in suspension, half ready for battle, half waiting for orders that never seem to come. They polish muskets until the metal gleams, then lay them aside. They drill until steps blur, then slump exhausted. They write letters home, sealing them as if each might be the last. The young man writes too. His hand trembles slightly as he tells his family he is well, omitting the rumors, the fear. He describes campfires, the songs, the camaraderie. He adds a line at the end. Think of me when you see the sky. It is the same one above us both. He folds the letter carefully, praying it will reach them. At night, the campfire stories change. Men no longer speak of dances or pranks. They whisper, instead of strategy, of terrain, of what battle might be like. Some boast, their words sharp with bravado. Others sit silent, staring into flames. The young man listens, his chest tight. He has heard stories before, but now he feels their weight pressing closer. Then comes a night of storm. Rain lashes the camp, tents buckling under gusts. Thunder cracks overhead, lightning splitting the sky with blinding white. The men lie awake, the roar around them indistinguishable from the roar they imagine battle might bring. The young man curls under his damp blanket, heart racing with each crash. When morning comes, the ground is sodden, the air heavy with steam. Nothing has changed, yet everything has. The storm leaves more than puddles. It leaves silence. Men move slower, speaking less. Even Thomas, once eager, grows quieter. His cough lingers, but now his voice carries a new weight. "Feels close," he whispers one evening. The young man does not ask what he means. He feels it too, the heaviness pressing from sky and rumor alike. The days of waiting stretch into weeks, yet tension does not ease. Each morning, the young man rises half expecting orders to march into battle. Each night, he lies down relieved and yet disappointed, as if dread itself has become a companion. He begins to understand. Sometimes the hardest part of war is not fighting, but waiting for the fight. Dawn holds its breath before anyone else does. The order comes without flourish, printed on plain paper, passed from hand to hand until it is only a crease and a whisper. Stand to at first light. No drums, no speech, just the quiet arrangement of men and the soft clink of buckles that turns a sleeping field into a line. Before the bugle, the camp moves like a house whose occupants wake carefully not to disturb a child. Shapes drift between tents, shoulders bowed beneath straps, tin cups set down with a care that keeps them from ringing. The young man feels the old nerves rise, but they do not rush him now. They gather, neat as folded shirts. Miller checks his cap, then the young man's, then Thomas's, tugging each brim down with the same tidy touch one might use on a Sunday collar. Thomas's cough rumbles, brief and stubborn. He nods that he's fine. No one says more. They are told to leave knapsacks behind. The field is dew dark, and the grass clings to trouser cuffs, beating like pearls before they turn to water. The air smells of wet earth and faint wood smoke and something metallic that could be fear or dawn. Somewhere, a horse shifts and snorts, the leather harness answering in a sleepy creak. The men form by companies, quiet as a congregation that has run out of hymns. The young man glances at the sky. The east is bruised lavender, a thin seam of silver along the horizon, no brighter than the edge of a coin. Birds have not started. The silence is so complete, he can hear the fabric of Miller's sleeve when the older man folds his arms. He understands that this, too, is part of soldiering. The minute when the world holds still as if to decide whether to continue. Commands pass in low voices, a vocabulary of economy. Dress the line, open the interval, steady now. He feels the touch of a shoulder on his right, the brush of a sleeve on his left, these small anchors tying him to more than his own breath. His musket sits in his hands the way a tool sits after weeks of work. Known, not loved. He rests the stock against his thigh and feels the grain of the wood, the tiny nick he made 2 nights ago when he caught the ramrod on a button. The nick is a familiar imperfection, a small proof that he is not holding a storybook. Skirmishers step forward, shadows peeling from the larger shadow of the line. When they slip into the hedgerow, the field looks wider, emptier. The young man swallows. He thinks of letters sealed last night. He thinks of bread left uneaten because his stomach would not agree to anything more than water. He thinks, unexpectedly, of the creek at home. Green light in summer, stones cold and round beneath his feet. He places that image in the pocket of his mind beside the smooth stone he carries in his coat. These are the small mercies he can bring with him. Miller leans close, voice barely a thread. Remember, load slow, breathe slower. Smoke lies, men don't. It is advice like so many of his. Half instruction, half weather report. The young man nods. He does not trust his mouth to find the right words. And besides, there's nothing to argue. Somewhere off to the left, a shot cracks. Clean, sharp, unadorned. It sounds like a stick breaking under a boot. A pause. Another. Then two together. Then several. Then the ripple that turns into a soft patter, like rain that does not yet believe in itself. The line stiffens. The first bird calls, a small, almost embarrassed sound. The horizon whitens. Forward, the captain says, and they go. Not a charge, just a walk that feels like a prayer, said by people who have not been to church in a while. The grass bends, wet to the knee. The young man's boots drink and complain. He breathes through his nose, slow, measured. The shape of the world narrows to the back of the man in front of him and the quiet square of his pack. He thinks, one more step, then another. They halt along a fence half swallowed by weeds. The captain's hand lifts and drops, and a row of men kneel with a creak of leather and a hush like pages turning. Load, comes the word, and the young man moves as he has practiced until the path of his hands does not require thought. Cartridge, bite, powder, tap, ball, ram, cap. He is gentler with the percussion cap than with anything he has touched in months. It is the size of a thimble and the size of a morning. He sets it like a promise kept. Across the low rise, smoke begins to bloom in a white seam. Beautiful if one did not know better. The skirmishers fall back in little pieces, as if the field itself is returning parts of itself to the main body. They come with faces blackened and breaths short, their feet finding the gaps the line makes, and suddenly the company feels fuller, more held. A sergeant from another unit pauses briefly at their fence, nods once to no one in particular, then moves on, and the nod says, "You are not alone in this, even if your hands shake." Ready? The word is quiet. The young man brings his musket to his shoulder. The wood fits his cheek. The first volleys arrive from the far line, not the single crack of a shot, but the torn cloth sound of many at once. The air trembles. A twig snaps inches above his cap and drops leaves into his hair. He does not duck. He wants to. He does not. Company, fire. Smoke leans forward out of his barrel like breath in winter. The recoil is gentle compared to what he expected. A firm push rather than a blow. The smell of powder is sweet and used, a scent that settles into clothing and does not leave for days. He cannot see what his shot did. The smoke is already a hedge between lines, an honest obstruction that lets men continue. He loads again, slower now, careful as a man threading a needle in poor light. Time loses its grammar. Seconds and minutes mix until the only markers are motions: load, raise, fire, breathe. Someone at his left is hit and sits down hard, as if reconsidering, hand pressed to his coat where the fabric turns dark. He is led away. The space closes with a sideways step that feels like a courtesy more than a tactic. The line is a table edge. Nothing must fall off. Thomas's cough returns between volleys, a soft hitch he tries to bury in his sleeve. He keeps working. The young man wants to glance over, but Miller's earlier advice returns. Smoke lies. Men don't. He keeps his eyes on the work. When the captain's voice drops, the shared language for conserve, he lowers his pace, fits each step to that single syllable. There is a quiet in battle that no one told him about. Not silence, never that, but a band of stillness underneath the noise, as if a river runs there. He finds it not by listening for absence, but by listening until sound becomes one thing, the combined, unremarkable labor of many. It steadies him more than courage does. He had always thought courage a flare. This is a hearth. The first push comes like weather, no dramatic shout, just a pressure across the field that shows itself in the way the smoke folds. The captain's hand lifts again. Bayonets are fixed with a music of steel that is not quite music. The young man does not look at the point of his own. He looks at the small screw he tightened the night before, at the way the steel sits straight because he willed it to. The line steps forward 2 paces, and he realizes the distance between abstraction and proximity can be measured in the length of a kitchen table. They do not meet. The push hesitates. The smoke takes a breath, and the field decides on a draw. Men on the far side ease back into the low rise. Their line wavers without breaking. Someone on the young man's right says a prayer too softly to identify the language. The captain lowers his hand. "Hold," he says, and it is the kindest word the young man has heard in months. What follows is work, the steady, unshowy work of keeping a place. Ammunition is passed as if along a pew, palm to palm, thanks murmured without names. Waterskins move the same way. Thomas takes a swallow and wipes his mouth like a child who does not want to stain his shirt, which would be funny if it were not so tender. Miller checks the young man's cap again, a needless gesture by now, and for a heartbeat, the young man feels 11 years old and late for chores. The memory steadies him more than the water does. The sun climbs, heat gathers, powder fouling turns locks tacky, and men pour a trickle of water, work the mechanism once, twice, coax it back to life. The field smells of trampled mint from some invisible patch underfoot, and that sweetness startles him. How fragrance survives. A swallow skims the smoke and is gone, a small dare to battle that battle does not accept. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure thins. The far smoke unknits. Commands travel down the line with the spare formality of closing a book. Stand easy. Dress back. Let them go. The young man does not trust the letting, not at first. He keeps his cheek to the wood until his shoulder tells him he is leaning against nothing now but habit. He lowers the musket. His hands are black as if he has been fixing a stove. He rubs his fingers together and they make a dry sound like paper. He looks to Thomas. The boy's face is gray at the edges, but he grins anyway, the grin of a man who has found his feet on a swinging bridge. "That it?" he says, half joking, half pleading. "That for now," Miller answers. He does not grin. He does not need to. His eyes have the disturbed softness of a field after wind, rippled, settling. Litter bearers move through with a measured kindness that belongs to no army and everyone. The sat-down man from earlier is gone. In his place, a smear like the afterthought of a cloud. The young man counts the men in his file, then stops. Counting will become a habit if he lets it, and he is not ready to know it that well. Instead, he counts his breaths. 4 in, 4 held, 4 out, until the river underneath the noise returns. When word comes to fall back by companies, they go in neat schoolroom increments, the captain's voice carving the move into easy pieces. The fence is crossed in the other direction. The grass is still wet under in the places the sun never reached. At the edge of the original camp, someone has laid bread on a blanket, already sliced, as if this were a church basement after a long sermon. The young man takes a piece and tastes yeast, salt, and something he cannot name that might be relief. No one shouts. No one tells a story. Men sit. They clean locks with care one gives to family heirlooms, the work unhurried, necessary as washing. The young man pulls a rag from his pocket and finds the dried berry stain from last week's forage. He smiles at the ordinariness of it. then works the stain darker with powder grime until it disappears into use. Thomas dabs at a powder smudge on his own cheek, and then leaves it when it only smears wider, the gesture turning into a shrug that says, "This face belongs to today now. It can be a different face tomorrow." "First of many," Miller says at last, not as warning but as weather. The young man nods. He understands that today was not the tallest wave, not the worst the sea can do. He also understands that he did not drown. Between those truths, a new space opens, quiet as a newly swept floor. He sits inside it and feels room where panic had been. Later, when the sun tilts and shadows lengthen like spoken thoughts, he walks to the creek. The water runs on as if muskets are only another kind of rain. He cups it, drinks, and watches the moon-softened ripples erase his reflection quickly, which feels, in its way, like mercy. In the mud at the edge, he draws the outline of a shoe, and then smears it with his palm so the line is there and not there at once. He thinks of the morning's fence, the evening's bread, the hours between where smoke lied and men did not. When he returns to the tent, the camp has resumed the modest music of itself. Spoons on tin, 2 or 3 notes of a fiddle, a cough with no drama, a laugh that is not a victory shout, but a decent sound to hear at the end of work. He lies down, feeling the clean weight of fatigue, the kind that comes when a thing has been met without flourish. Thomas turns on his side and mumbles something about onions. Miller's breath clocks the seconds without keeping time. The young man closes his eyes and sees not the smoke or the fence or the long line of blue, but the captain's hand when it dropped for hold, the bread on the blanket, the way a swallow stitched morning to afternoon with one unbothered arc. His heart does not race. It trots home and ties itself to the post. He sleeps, not triumphantly, not even deeply, but rightly, as men do after they have stood where they were told, and kept that place as if it mattered, which it did. Empty bunks speak louder than any farewell. Morning arrives without announcement. No bugle, no bark of orders. Just the slow stirring of men in canvas shelters, groaning as they rise, coughing as they lace boots. The young man wakes to the familiar shuffle and realizes, almost without thought, that something is different. A space beside him is empty, blanket folded neatly, ground still pressed where a body lay. At first, he thinks Thomas has gone to fetch water or that Miller has stepped away to stoke the fire. But the silence stretches. The absence grows solid. Then someone mutters, "So-and-so didn't answer roll call. Desertion maybe, or maybe sickness took him in the night." The young man feels his stomach tighten, as if hunger has been replaced by something heavier. It is strange how absence speaks louder than presence. A laugh once expected no longer comes. A cough that filled nights now leaves only stillness. An argument over rations is missing, and in its place, uneasy quiet. Men avoid looking at the empty space, yet everyone knows it is there. The young man remembers how Thomas once tucked his blanket over him on a cold night. He remembers Miller's hand steadying his musket when it jammed. He remembers jokes, grumbles, small mercies. Now he imagines those gestures hanging in the air with no one to give them, echoes without source. The camp moves on, as it must. Rations are distributed, drills called. The company forms its lines, one gap narrower now. The captain does not mention names, he counts numbers. War does not pause for sentiment, yet the young man feels the weight of that silence more than the weight of his musket. Soft shock comes during supper. A spoon scrapes a tin plate where once a voice would have filled the space with story. The young man glances at the empty pallet, waiting for Thomas to laugh at some foolishness, or for Miller to remark about the soup. Nothing comes. the absence is louder than words. He learns that grief in camp is a private ritual lived in public. No one wails, no one keens. Men eat, march, clean muskets. But eyes flick to the space left behind. Packs are divided. A musket is claimed. Boots are tried on. For fit. The belongings of the missing are absorbed by the living, practical as breath. Yet the spirit of the man lingers, stubborn, refusing to be divided. That night, the young man lies awake, staring at the tent roof. He hears snoring, coughing, shifting, and in between, he hears silence, the particular silence of one voice gone. He wonders if families back home hear silence the same way, when letters stop coming, when chairs at tables remain empty. He wonders if mothers wake at night to silence heavier than sound. Miller breaks the hush once, voice low. Don't stare at the bunks too long. You'll lose yourself in them. His words are harsh, but not unkind. He has seen more emptiness than he admits. The young man nods in the dark, though he cannot look away. The following day, the company is assigned fatigue duty, cutting logs, hauling water, digging trenches. Work fills hands, though not hearts. Every now and then, someone cracks a joke, thin and brittle. Laughter rises but falls quickly, as if ashamed of itself. The young man forces himself to laugh too, but inside he feels hollow. One evening, a chaplain passes through camp. He says prayers over a small mound of earth where a man is buried. The words are formal, well-meaning, but the young man cannot catch them. What he remembers is the shovel scraping stone, the way the mound looks too small for all it holds. He wonders whether anyone will tend it when the army moves on, or whether the man's name will fade like smoke. Absence has another face, desertion. One morning, a bunk is empty and whispers fly. He slipped off in the night. Some curse him, calling him coward. Others envy him, picturing home. The young man says nothing. He does not know which he feels more strongly, anger that someone left them thinner, or longing to follow. He lies awake that night, staring at stars, wondering what became of the man. Is he hiding in woods, walking roads north, dead in a ditch? Absence asks more questions than presence ever could. The young man writes a letter that evening, telling his family he is well. He does not mention empty bunks. He cannot bring himself to write those words. Instead, he describes sunsets, the way fireflies blink at the edge of camp. He tells them the men sing sometimes. He pretends the bunks are still full. Miller senses the weight pressing on him. You'll see more go, he says softly. Some home, some under, some just away. Don't let it hollow you. Fill the spaces with something else. Stories, work, anything. Otherwise, the bunks will eat you alive. The young man nods. He does not yet know how to fill those spaces, but he knows he must try. Winter brings survival shaped by shared routine. The war does not end when the snow falls. It merely changes costume. Gone are the fields of smoke and thunder. In their place come nights of frost and mornings so bitter that breath turns to crystal in the air. The young man learns quickly that winter is not just a season. It is a campaign all its own. The first flakes drift lazily, soft and almost welcome after months of mud. They melt at once on canvas and sleeve, leaving only damp spots. But as days shorten and the sun weakens, the flakes multiply, thickening until the camp is blanketed. Men tramp through drifts with boots stiff from cold, their steps crunching like breaking glass. Fires sputter in the wind, and every chore takes twice the time. Even lifting a canteen becomes trial when fingers are numb. Tents alone will not do. Under Miller's instruction, the squad begins digging a pit for a hut. The work is brutal. the ground hard as iron, the tools scarce. Yet there is a grim rhythm to it, spade against earth, logs dragged and stacked, clay packed between gaps. The young man's hands crack and bleed, but he keeps on. By the week's end, walls rise, smoke curls from a makeshift chimney, and for the first time in months, warmth holds steady through the night. Inside, life settles into routine. Miller maintains the fire with the care of a farmer tending stock. Thomas, though coughing, takes to cooking, mastering ash cakes and stews made from meager stores. Jenkins, youngest of all, scours camp for scraps of news, trading gossip like currency. The young man himself finds a role he never expected, telling stories. At night, when wind claws at the roof and the chimney sighs, he speaks softly, half-remembered tales, small legends, even fragments of home. His words stretch thin but hold the group together, each man warming his hands at the fire of imagination. Soft shock arrives in the form of silence. Winter steals sound as much as warmth. Nights stretch long, broken only by coughing fits or the snap of a log. The absence of noise unsettles him more than gunfire. He lies awake, hearing his own heartbeat echo in the hush, and wonders if this is what the world sounds like after everything ends. He whispers once into the dark, just to break the weight of it, and Thomas whispers back, a nonsense rhyme that makes them both chuckle. Small defiance, but enough. Hunger deepens as supplies thin. Salt pork grows rancid, hardtack harder still. Men dream of apples, pies, steaming bread. They speak recipes aloud, voices hushed, as if describing food could feed them. The young man chews slowly on stale crumbs, pretending they are sweeter than they are. Miller catches his eye once and mutters, "Keep chewing." Stomach doesn't know the difference. Boredom gnaws sharper than hunger. Days blur. Drill when weather allows, chores when it doesn't, then hours of nothing. Men gamble with scraps of coin, carve wood, mend socks with thread pulled from old seams. The young man writes letters he cannot send, filling page after page with thoughts unsuited for family eyes. He writes anyway, because silence must be answered somehow. Illness moves like shadow. Coughs deepen, fevers rise, men carried out on stretchers to overcrowded hospital huts. Each day, the roll call thins. The young man watches Thomas grow pale, each breath labored, yet still he jokes. "Snow keeps the lice honest," he says one morning, though his lips are blue. The young man laughs, but inside, fear coils tight. And still, winter holds. Snow piles against the hut. Wind howls like wolves. The young man wakes one morning to find frost tracing lace on the inside of canvas, delicate and cruel. He breathes on it, watches it melt, and thinks, survival itself is a kind of victory. Yet within hardship lies strange intimacy. The men share everything, food, warmth, even silence. They learn to read one another's faces, to offer comfort without words. A mug passed, a shoulder leaned against, a song hummed softly into cold air. Each gesture becomes an anchor. The young man realizes he is no longer merely enduring, he is belonging. One night, as the storm rages outside, Miller carves into the lintel of the hut. Home, sweet home. The letters are crooked, uneven, but when the firelight touches them, the young man feels a lump in his throat. This hut, smoky and cramped, is indeed home, for now, and the men within, mismatched and weary, are family. The quiet climax comes when the chaplain gathers them one Sunday. Snow still falls, boots still crunch, but for an hour the men sing hymns, voices wavering yet strong. The young man does not know if he believes every word, but the sound fills the frozen air with warmth. He closes his eyes and lets it wash over him. Not faith, perhaps, but something close. The belief that together they can last the winter. The horizon opens toward loss and renewal. The thaw comes slowly, like a man waking from a long illness. Snow shrinks into rivulets, trickling between huts, carrying away ashes and scraps of the winter just survived. Grass shows itself in patches, stubborn and green, as if mocking the months of cold. With each sunrise, the camp stirs earlier, the men stepping outside to feel sun on faces once hidden in scarves. The young man stands among them, boots in mud, heart caught between relief and apprehension. Winter has been endured. Now something else begins. Orders arrive as everyone knew they would. The huts, painstakingly built, carved with initials, lived in like homes, are to be abandoned. Men mutter but obey. Fires are quenched, doors left swinging, walls already leaning as if they knew their purpose was temporary. The young man runs a hand across the lintel where Miller carved "Home Sweet Home." His fingers trace the grooves, and he feels the weight of memory pressed into wood. It seems wrong to leave it, yet he knows he must. War does not pause for sentiment. Packing feels strange after months of stasis. Knapsacks, lightened by attrition, now feel heavy again. Muskets are oiled, cartridge boxes filled, blankets rolled. The young man folds a scrap of paper, a letter never sent, and tucks it deep into his coat. He cannot explain why. Perhaps to carry some remnant of winter forward. Perhaps because words unsent weigh less than words left behind. When the column forms, the men stand fewer in number. Empty bunks have become empty places in the line. The young man glances at the gaps, each as noticeable as a missing tooth. He does not ask who will replace them. He knows replacements will come, raw and wide-eyed, and they too will learn, and some will vanish. The cycle continues. The march begins under a pale sky. The huts shrink behind them, their chimneys like broken teeth against the horizon. No one looks back for long. Soldiers are superstitious about looking too hard at things left behind. To glance is to tempt fate, as if longing itself might keep you from ever returning. The young man allows one final look, then faces forward. The road ahead is soft with thaw, each step a struggle. Boots sink, mud clings, yet spirits are oddly lighter than before. Men joke, though voices are hoarse. Miller walks with steady pace, Thomas with a cough but a stubborn grin. Jenkins, eager as always, hums under his breath. The young man joins the rhythm, step by step, breath by breath, the horizon opening like a question. Soft shock arrives not from enemy fire, but from the landscape itself. Fields once farmed now lie in ruin, fences toppled, barns collapsed, orchards cut down for timber. Children watch from doorways, faces pale, eyes too old. A woman stands with laundry frozen stiff in her hands, staring as the column passes. The young man feels her gaze like a weight. He wonders what she sees in him. Soldier, liberator, intruder, or simply another shadow moving across her road. That night, camp is pitched in open fields. No huts now, only canvas sagging under damp air. The men huddle close, speaking softly. Some polish bayonets, though none expect to use them yet. Others write letters, pens scratching like insects in the dark. The young man lies back, staring at stars. They look the same as they did above winter's roof, above autumn marches, above every place he has been. That sameness steadies him. Perhaps the stars are the only home a soldier truly keeps. As days turn into weeks, rumors once more return. Talk of battle, of movement, of decisions made far above their heads. The young man listens, but he no longer lets the whispers gnaw at him. He has learned patience, the slow strength of waiting. He has seen how storms come whether expected or not, and how men endure them the same way, step by step, breath by breath. Then comes a quiet morning. The company forms, thin but steady. Orders are given. The line moves forward. The horizon stretches wide, hills blurring into haze. The young man feels the familiar weight of musket and pack. He feels fear, yes, but it is quieter now, folded into his chest like another letter unsent. He glances at Thomas, who coughs and nods. He glances at Miller, who lifts his chin as if to say, "Keep walking." Jenkins hums louder, defiant in his youth. The road bends, and beyond the bend lies whatever waits. Battle, hunger, or maybe only more marching. The young man does not know. He understands now that he may never know until the moment itself arrives. But as the wind shifts, carrying scents of thawed earth and distant blossoms, he realizes something has changed. He is not simply surviving anymore. He is living inside the uncertainty, carrying winter's lessons with him. From mud roads to paved paths, the story of those winters, of muddy marches and makeshift huts, belongs to another world. The young men who bent their backs against frost and hunger did so in a land without the protections we take for granted now. They carried not just muskets, but the weight of uncertainty. No pension guaranteed, no medical care assured, no law beyond the orders of officers and the discipline of survival. When you sit in your living room tonight, perhaps with a small lamp glowing by your side, it is easy to forget how new such security truly is. In those years of the war, a soldier could be sent home with nothing but a folded piece of paper declaring him honorably discharged. If his arm shook from an old wound, or his lungs never cleared from camp fever, the government had little to offer but sympathy. Families bore the burden. Neighbors stepped in where they could. Too often, no one did. But time has moved. Nations have grown wiser. Today, across much of the world, there are systems, imperfect though they may be, that try to care for those who serve. Veterans return not to silence, but to hospitals, to clinics, to laws that promise them at least a measure of dignity. Disability pay, health benefits, counseling, none of these erase the cost of war, yet they acknowledge it. They make it known that a man or woman will not be left entirely to fend for themselves in the aftermath. Think of the contrast. The young man of our story stumbling home with only a knapsack and a scar, versus the modern veteran stepping off a plane, greeted not only by family, but by agencies, programs, and communities. It does not heal the inner wounds, not completely, but it offers recognition, something more than folded paper. And beyond soldiers, the wider world too has changed. Where once widows struggled in silence, today there are survivor benefits. Where once a child of a fallen man grew up without schooling, today education can be promised. Nations discovered, slowly and at great cost, that neglecting those who serve is neglecting the nation itself. The change is not just in law, but in life. Where once roads turned to rivers of mud that swallowed wagons whole, today asphalt carries travelers smoothly from town to town. Where once news from home took weeks to arrive by wagon or train, today a voice can be heard instantly across oceans. Where once isolation was the deepest wound of all, today connection threads through wires and screens, a reminder that no one is as far from home as those men once were. Still, remembering matters. It is not to compare suffering, nor to say that one age is harder than another. Rather, it is to hold the past gently, like a photograph worn at the corners, and to see how far the journey has carried us. Those men lived in a world without safety nets. Their winters were harsher, their absences heavier, because law and community had not yet built the structures we now inhabit. Tonight, as you listen, perhaps with the quiet hum of a heater nearby, or the steady whirl of a fan, let yourself notice the difference. You are warm because others once froze. You are secure because others once carried insecurity. You walk smooth roads because others once trudged through mud. From lonely letters to living voices. There was a time, not so long ago, when a soldier's only thread back to his world was a letter carried in a satchel, shaken loose across rivers, rails, and rough hands. Weeks might pass before ink scratched on one night reached the eyes of family, and sometimes the journey failed entirely. The page lost in mud or fire, leaving a mother or a sweetheart staring at silence. You can almost picture it. Lantern light in a farmhouse kitchen, a woman bending over the table, lips moving as she reads the words once whispered by her boy far away. Those letters were treasure. They were not just news, but proof of breath. In their absence, fear grew. A week without a letter meant worry. A month meant despair. The young man from our story learned this in reverse. A wagon rolled into camp, and suddenly, for a few brief hours, men were boys again. They tore open envelopes, pressed photographs against their hearts, shared cakes, apples, socks lovingly packed. In those nights, camp felt like home, if only for a moment. But there was always the shadow. Sometimes your name was not called. Sometimes the wagon held nothing for you, and that emptiness bit deeper than hunger. Now, look how different the world has become. A message can cross oceans in less than a breath. A son deployed far away can see his mother's face on a glowing screen, hear her voice not as echo, but as presence. No more waiting weeks to know if a loved one is alive or well. No more hoping that the words survive the road. Communication today is as constant as heartbeat. Think of what that means. Loneliness is not erased, but it is softened. A soldier in the desert can hear his child's laugh on a birthday. A daughter serving overseas can see her father's hands holding a mug at the kitchen table. The gaps that once stretched painfully have been drawn closer, not by horses or trains, but by wires, satellites, and signals invisible yet steady. It does not stop war from being war, but it changes the burden. Where once silence was the heaviest enemy, today connection offers relief. Where once a mother lit candles by the window, waiting for word, today she holds a phone close, hearing her son's voice, alive and immediate. The ache is different, but it is not the same loneliness. And beyond soldiers, all of us live in this new closeness. Families scattered across states or seas can remain near. Grandparents see grandchildren grow week by week, not just in memory, but in living image. Friends share joys and sorrows in real time, even when miles apart. The world has shrunk, not in size, but in silence. The young man who once folded his letter and sealed it with trembling hands could never imagine such a thing. He would marvel at a world where words travel faster than wind, where a voice never needs to be carried by stranger's satchel. Perhaps he would smile, wistful, and say, "If only we had this then." Yet there is a lesson too. The slowness of letters carried weight. Each word was chosen, each sentence a labor of care. Modern voices are instant, plentiful. We risk forgetting their value. To honor the past, perhaps we should read our own messages with the reverence those mothers once gave a fragile letter, stained with rain and handled by tired hands. From fragile survival to structured safety. Once, survival was not a promise. It was a gamble. A soldier might come home with scars the eye could see, or scars hidden deeper, no one cared to name. And if he came home broken, the burden was carried by his family alone. There were no counselors waiting, no clinics specialized in the invisible wounds of the mind. The community might offer sympathy, but sympathy does not mend a body, nor steady a restless heart. The young man we followed through mud and frost learned this at the end of his march. His reward for endurance was not assurance, but a slip of paper declaring him discharged. No pension to speak of, no doctor trained for trauma, no law guaranteeing care. He stepped into the world as if stepping into a storm with no shelter. What came next depended not on a nation's structures, but on sheer chance. Whether his family could carry him, whether work could be found despite the limp, whether kindness appeared along the road. It is worth pausing here, in our present comfort, to feel the difference. For today, the world, at least in much of it, has built guardrails around lives once so precarious. Laws protect the wounded, benefits follow service. Nations, having learned through bitter centuries, now acknowledge that a soldier's burden must be shared, not hidden in private rooms. A man who returns limping finds not just his family waiting, but the hand of state, however imperfect, offering prosthetics, pensions, therapy. A woman who serves finds not just discharge papers, but job programs, education, and rights secured by law. Beyond the soldier, society itself is altered. The everyday person need not fear starvation because a single harvest fails. Systems of welfare, insurance, healthcare, imperfect but present, now catch many who once would have fallen without notice. Consider how once a single illness could empty a household, reduce children to orphans, drive mothers to beg. Today, hospitals, public programs, and laws provide at least some shield. Not full protection, never full, but a net, woven by the hard lessons of those who endured when nets did not exist. Internationally, too, the world has grown structured. In the young man's century, nations went to war without charter, without council, without law to moderate fury. Borders shifted with battles. Civilians bore the brunt with little recourse. Today, however faltering, there are agreements, conventions, laws binding nations to standards. Refugees find agencies to help them. Prisoners of war are meant to be protected by treaties. The Red Cross, the United Nations, the very idea of human rights. None of these stood to guard the men in winter huts. They endured alone, their only defense the stubbornness of their own humanity. And we, sitting comfortably tonight, inherit not only the safety nets, but also the responsibility to keep them strong. To remember that behind every law stands a story like his, men coughing in cold huts, mothers reading letters by candlelight, families burying sons in unmarked fields. Their trials were the soil in which today's protections grew. Soft shock lies in realizing how new this safety truly is. A mere century and a half has passed since those empty bunks, those lonely roads. In the sweep of history, that is no time at all. We live in the first generations where survival is not merely chance but structured care, where law and policy step in where once only silence stood. Imagine if the young man could see it. Veterans gathering in community centers, not around campfires. Widows receiving pensions without begging neighbors. Wounded men fitted with limbs of steel and fiber, walking again with dignity. He would shake his head, not in disbelief, but in quiet relief, perhaps whispering, "It was not for nothing. The world learned, from nations at war to laws of peace." Once war was not an exception. It was the rhythm of nations. Borders were written and erased with bayonets. and the fate of whole communities turned on the sound of cannon. The young man in our story was not unusual. Every town sent its sons, every family braced for absence, every community bore the weight of conflict. A child might grow up counting graves rather than birthdays, and whole generations learned that survival meant living always on the edge of another march, another call, another loss. There was no charter to appeal to, no binding law to restrain the ambitions of kings or presidents. War was simply declared, armies raised, lives spent. Civilians were as vulnerable as soldiers, often more so. If your home lay in the path of the march, your field became a campsite, your barn a storehouse, your orchard a battlefield. You endured not because of law, but in spite of its absence. Now pause and look at how the landscape of nations has changed. After centuries of blood, the world built frameworks to hold itself back. The United Nations, however flawed, exists to mediate disputes before they ignite. International courts prosecute crimes that once went unpunished. Borders are not meant to shift on the whim of one man's ambition, but to be honored under treaties. Aggression still comes, but now it faces the judgment of the world. Consider the Geneva Conventions. Words on paper, yes, but words with teeth. They bind even enemies to rules, protect the wounded, treat prisoners humanely, spare civilians where possible. These principles, imperfectly applied, are nonetheless a miracle compared to the lawlessness of the young man's day. Where once a captured soldier might expect only hunger or execution, now there is at least a framework of rights, a chance of mercy secured not by chance, but by obligation. The difference extends beyond battlefields. Today, most citizens of stable nations live without daily fear of invasion. Children walk to school not through war-torn fields, but along paved sidewalks. Farmers tend crops with the expectation they will harvest, not with dread that marching boots will trample rows. Whole generations in some lands have grown up without hearing cannon, without fearing that their barns will be burned or their families scattered. This is not universal. War still rages in corners of the globe, but it is remarkable compared to the near-constant state of conflict that once consumed Europe, America, Asia alike. Soft shock rests in realizing how normal war once was. In the young man's time, no one questioned that armies would gather every decade or two. Peace was the fragile pause, not the natural state. Today, in much of the world, we reverse that expectation. War is the rupture. Peace is the assumption. That shift, born of law and alliance, marks one of the greatest quiet revolutions in human history. Alliances now act as deterrents. Where once a single spark might ignite a continent, today, webs of treaties hold fire breaks. NATO, the European Union, trade agreements. These are not just politics, but promises that your neighbor's son will not be dragged into mud and frost for a quarrel of borders. The young man would marvel at the idea that a war between major powers has been avoided for generations, not because men are gentler, but because nations built laws strong enough to restrain them. Yet this peace is not to be taken for granted. The structures that hold it are fragile, requiring maintenance, respect, and memory. Forgetfulness is dangerous. That is why stories of mud huts and empty bunks matter. They remind us what the world was like when law did not protect, when nations acted without consequence. Remembering is itself a safeguard, a quiet defense against slipping backward. So tonight, as we sit in comfort, perhaps with the soft glow of city lights outside our window, we should honor the distance traveled. We rest beneath the shield of treaties and courts, protections unimaginable to the young man who once carved "Home, Sweet Home" into a hut wall. His winter was endured in a world without such laws. Our winters are spent under roofs, held steady, not only by beams, but by agreements. Agreements that keep the storms of war outside. From shadow of war to everyday light. In the century and a half since those men trudged through Virginia mud, the world has changed in ways they could scarcely imagine. Where once the drumbeat of war was a rhythm everyone expected, now for many, the hum of daily life is steady and unbroken. Peace is no longer a pause between battles. In many places, it is the canvas on which ordinary joys are painted. Think of the contrast. The young man of our story went to sleep with musket near his hand, boots half laced in case of sudden alarm. His dreams were threaded with gunfire, his mornings with fear of orders. Today, countless people rest in houses that lock against nothing more than the weather. Children sleep without rehearsing escape, without knowing what it means to huddle at the sound of distant cannon. The everyday, once fragile, has become strong. Where once a meal might vanish with a single supply wagon's delay, today markets brim with food from every season. Where once water might turn foul in camp barrels, today clean taps flow as constant as rain. Where once the only music was a soldier's fiddle, played against silence, today radios, phones, and voices link homes across oceans. The ordinary has become extraordinary compared to the past. It is not that sorrow has vanished. Wars still burn in parts of the world. Families still know loss. But the difference is profound. There are laws to challenge it, communities to respond, a chorus of nations to condemn and intervene. Violence is no longer an unquestioned fate. It is a tragedy to be prevented, an exception to be answered. For those who lived then, life was survival. For us, life can be more. We can cultivate gardens, send children to school, argue about art and music rather than borders and fields. We can walk in city streets at night, lights glowing above, not fearing the sudden flare of torches and marching boots. That ordinariness is a triumph, hard won by those who had none. Soft shock lies in realizing how easily we forget. The struggles of the past fade into history books, into dates memorized and forgotten. Yet beneath each date lies a winter night in a smoky hut, a letter pressed to a soldier's chest, a mother watching the road for footsteps that never came. Remembering them keeps the present honest. Remembering them allows us to cherish the gentle light of the everyday. The young man, were he to walk among us now, would not recognize our streets, our machines, our voices carried instantly across the air. But he would recognize something deeper, the warmth of safety, the laughter of families gathered without fear, the luxury of sleep unbroken by alarms. He would smile, I think, to see that his suffering and that of his fellows was not the final word, that their endurance seeded a world where peace is real enough to cradle generations. And so, here at the end of our long story, we rest in gratitude. Gratitude that winters are now endured with heaters, not smoky chimneys of clay. Gratitude that absences are bridged by voices and screens. Gratitude that the laws of nations, however imperfect, lean toward mercy rather than silence. The past was hard, but it carried us here. And now, dear listener, let this be your comfort. The shadows of war belong to yesterday. Tonight, your world is lit by gentler lamps. Laws, communities, connections, the simple warmth of bed and home. Close your eyes, knowing the ordinary is a gift hard won. Sleep in that light, safe and at peace.